volume from here.
Yeah, of course.
So that we don't end up with the same squelch.
Breach. Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Do you-
so either yellow lights work or public?
Seem to be found.
Yeah, this one was doing fine.
Did you try it?
Yeah, this is one you were talking
Well,
about.
we rechecked with his and I had to rebalance it.
Check, check.
Okay.
This was the,
That's reasonable.
oh, that was a chair speech. Okay. And it looks like it's picking us up from here, so I think we're good.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Just wanna
can
make
hook
sure.
up to those. Those should be all the same.
Yeah, I'm still so new to this. I'm trying to make sure I'm doing the Zoom settings right, and it looks like it's picking up the audio that's going green.
Yeah.
Turn this off,
That
so
too.
it's picking it up from somewhere else. I think it's picking it up from
The
your
computer?
Yeah. It
Oh,
might-
okay, fair.
Now check. Yep.
Woo! That's probably it. Try to get both. Okay. Cool. All right, just want to make sure we're good with this unknown equipment here.
All right, hopefully this works well, no feedback. How's the volume? We good? Okay, perfect. I just want to say thank you for coming tonight. I'm Angela Metler. I work in the president's office at South Dakota Mines, and this is Steam Cafe. We do this every third Tuesday. This is a partnership with South Dakota Public Broadcasting and with Hay Camp Brewing. So we also thank them for their support. We couldn't do it without them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time up here. I will introduce tonight's presenter, Dr. Brett Lingwall. He's going to talk about extremophiles at surf and lead.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to talk about a lot more than just some microbes at the bottom of Sanford Underground Lab. There's a lot more we're going to talk about. So extremophiles, which are microbes that can live in and thrive in extreme conditions, just as a small part of the story. The larger story is atmospheric carbon capture and sequestration using biology. And now the clicker is not working. Did the graphic freeze? There we go. I don't know what you did, but well done. So the work that I'm presenting today is not my own. This is work that was performed and is still going on by an amazing team of researchers at South Dakota Mines. Some of them are former students like Jerry Wright, who had graduated with his PhD in civil engineering a few years ago, and others are faculty and former faculty and consultants. So myself, Professor Gosha Yusisinik from geology, who's our petrologist, Professor Tanvi Goval from chemical engineering, who is our synthetic biology expert, Professor Rajesh Sani, who is the microbiologist, and Dan Soder is a geologist who's our expert in carbon capture on the team. So this is the work from a lot of different people, plus some graduate students, and we're very grateful for financial support from the National Science Foundation, that is the funding agency for all the work we're going to talk about today. Many thanks as well to Megan Vaughn, who was a graduate student in chemical and biological engineering, who did much of the experiments that we're going to see later in the presentation. And also significant thanks to some of our current students, in particular Madison Betts, who's a geology student. So this is what we call transdisciplinary research, because we have research from many different fields of science. We have engineers, we have scientists, we have applied people, we have fundamental people, transdisciplinary research. Why are we here? We're here because atmospheric greenhouse gases produce substantial effects. Now, whether you're a climate change believer or that's why we're here. So I've got a graphic here. This is a graphic that comes from the general media showing atmospheric carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide over time, which are three of the principal greenhouse gases. And you can see how things were stable for thousands of years, and then we have this ramp up. Notable little blip, there's a little blip right there. That little blip is the Little Ice Age, which was a 150-year cooling period that was caused when the Native American population was decimated by smallpox. The population in the Americas went down, and the Native Americans were using burning wood for cooking and heating almost exclusively. And that minor drop in atmospheric carbon dioxide caused the Little Ice Age, which was a 150-year cold period. So that small little blip was notable in terms of how we lived on the planet. And as you can see, things have really gotten out of hand since then. There is relative greenhouse effect from different gases. We're going to talk a lot about carbon dioxide today, but carbon dioxide is not the bad actor. It's just the most common actor. Methane is far more potent a greenhouse gas, although it composes less of the atmosphere. Nitrous oxide is something like 128 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Nobody wants to talk about nitrogen, but it's more potent than carbon dioxide. And then there's fluorinated gases such as SF6, which are not natural. They only come from man-made processes, and they're hundreds to thousands of times more potent greenhouse gases. It's good that that makes up only a small fraction of the total atmosphere, or we would be in real trouble. So one of the things we need to talk about is some of the fundamental science about atmospheric gases. So this is a diagram that shows the nitrogen cycle. We just talked about how nitrogen gases are far more potent than carbon gases to climate change. And nitrogen is always cycling all around us. There's fertilizer being put on your garden or on a field. That fertilizer, some of it goes into the ground and is absorbed by plants and utilized by microbes. Other is lost to the atmosphere where it comes up. However, the nitrogen comes back down with rain and other atmospheric processes. And so the nitrogen is continuously cycling through nature. The good news for us is that these cycles of different chemicals like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are highly effective, pervasive cycles that happen all around the world. And if the cycling was not happening, we would be in some real trouble. Carbon also cycles, and cycles through many different pathways. Carbon goes up into the atmosphere, it comes out of the atmosphere, it goes into the ground, it comes out of the ground. It's in all of us, it's in vegetation, it's in the wood I'm standing on. Carbon is ubiquitous and it's always moving. So that's one of the key things we need to talk about today, is how carbon's always on the move, and there are natural processes that are pulling carbon out and pulling the carbon back in. What we're trying to do with our research is leverage the natural ways of pulling the carbon back out of the atmosphere and trying to use what we call biomediated processes, where we're using biology to mediate solutions to atmospheric greenhouse gas. In the popular media, they love to show us all sorts of carbon budgets. There's a few things you need to know about these carbon budgets. I've got one here from a recent, this is methane emissions by sector from a physics.org publication that was published last week. And it shows, methane emissions by industry sector in 2020. And I guess you're supposed to see that livestock are going to kill us all, apparently. there's some things we need to know when we see these statistics. And this is kind of public service announcement before we get to the science that we've done. This is not a complete methane budget for the planet. This is somebody's assessment of some economic sources. Not included on this chart is wheat. The production of wheat produces more methane than livestock, but for some reason wheat's not on here. Nor is human gut fermentation. It's happening in all of our stomachs right now. Methane production in your stomach is not on this methane budget. And there's a lot of people on this planet. First started thinking about that when we were working on termite mounds in Africa. That's my colleague, Dr. Andrea Surovec from South Dakota Mines, standing next to a termite mound in Namibia. The termite mound, it's fungus farming termites. You crack this thing open and you are overwhelmed by a flood of methane. It is overpowering. The whole reason the termites build this tower is to try to get ventilation out of their colony where there's several billion organisms living, generating a lot of methane, and they're trying to get that methane out of the ground, out of their subterranean nest. Hence, they build the tower as part of their ventilation system. Termites are ubiquitous. Fungus farming ants are ubiquitous around the world, producing far more methane than humans, livestock, all combined, yet they never end up in these budgets. So, public service announcement. Always be cautious when you see these kinds of things. Let's talk about carbon capture now. There's a lot of ways we can capture carbon in industry that are currently on the market. One of the ways that was if any of the ethanol plants around South Dakota and the Midwest, they all are producing large amounts of carbon dioxide or methane. And carbon dioxide is being captured out of their process. And that CO2 is being captured. And it made its way into your fizzy drinks today. It's where the carbon dioxide for your soda comes from. It comes from ethanol plants. It's a pure off-gas product from the ethanol production process. They capture it, they sell it to Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So we are capturing a lot of carbon dioxide in industry right now. So the problem isn't necessarily industrial carbon dioxide from facilities, from point sources, because we know how to capture that. It's just a matter of actually funding it to do it on all facilities. More likely, we need to get carbon out of the atmosphere. So if we're going to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, we use the term direct air capture, or DAC. And there's a range of different technologies that have come onto the scene in the last 10 years. Some of the facilities and technologies are large scale, like Carbfix in Iceland, which is a major industrial facility that is built using geothermal energy in Iceland. It pulls a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere, but it needs high temperature processes for the process that they're using. Their process is not unique. They're just the ones who've been able to scale it up most in the world. We're working with a company called Carbon Blade, which produces these small deployable units that are powered by renewable energy, some solar panels and some wind turbines, and these Carbon Blade units can pull about 300 tons of CO2 out of the air per year per unit. And you can see it's just a shipping container with some solar panels. And then they have a very clever chemical process, a looping chemical process that requires very little energy. And they pull out compressed pure CO2. It's pretty amazing. There's many, many startups out there that are selling different technologies to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of money right now, a lot of investment, and so there's a lot of startup companies. This is one, Mission Zero, which comes out of the UK. They received some notoriety just last week for their process, which uses a water-based solvent, which dissolves CO2 into the liquid, and then they remove it using an electrodialysis process. They're in fundraising. They're trying to raise money so they can build a plant similar to what Carbfix already has. So there's a lot of ways we can pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. The problem is, what do we do with that carbon once it's out? We can only sell so much to the soda manufacturers. There's only so much CO2 that needs to go into our fizzy drinks. So now the question is, what do we do with that carbon dioxide now that it's out of the atmosphere, or methane, or nitrogen gas, whatever the gas is? So there are many different ways, many applications, but two principal paths that present themselves to us. This is a figure that we developed for some of our research showing all of the different applications all kind of in one figure. Basically, what we can do, once we have this captured CO2, we can either reuse it for something, try to manufacture it into something, or we can try to sequester it, store it, lock it away. So a lot of the research that we're doing is in sequestration, which is locking the carbon away. We're also doing research in beneficial reuse. So we're upcycling that CO2, harvesting the carbon out of the CO2, taking that carbon and turning it into beneficial products that we sell. But as you can see, there's a lot of different applications. We're going to revisit this figure later in the presentation. So let's talk about a fundamental issue of this whole process. So captured carbon, if you're using natural processes, industrial, something, you have to measure, represent, and verify the volume of carbon that was pulled out of the atmosphere so that it can be quantified properly for use in some sort of a carbon market or in carbon credits. The problem is there's not a consistent mechanism in the United States or anywhere around the world for any industry that's been used to measure, represent, or verify that captured carbon. So the carbon markets are a bit of the Wild West. People are selling carbon credits and they're buying and selling, but only a few places and a few organizations have started to quantify and using measurable, verifiable techniques. So everything that we're trying to do is measurable, representable, and verifiable. Because we don't want it to be just something where, you know, oh, it sounds like a great idea enough. We want it to be meaningful. Let's talk about beneficial reuse. So we've captured some carbon out of the atmosphere using one of these processes. We use carbon blade. And one thing we can do is we can use something called catalysis, either biocatalysis or chemocatalysis, which are fundamental processes in chemical engineering for taking raw materials, using some sort of catalytic process, whether it's biological or chemical, to synthesize chemicals out of the raw building blocks. So the raw building block we take is carbon dioxide. And this is a figure from a wonderful study that was published, the reference is down at the bottom, where they have a process. This is different than what we've been working on, but they take captured carbon dioxide and they use biocatalysis to create jet fuel. There's many intermediary steps. The carbon dioxide and hydrogen are used to make what's called formic acid. The formic acid is then upcycled and upcycled and upcycled. But if you keep adding enough hydrogen and carbon from the atmosphere, from other sources and water, you can make jet fuel. And it works really well. It's not cost effective though. Just because we can do it doesn't mean that we can do it at scale and for good enough cost. So although this process works, you can create a small little vial that's really expensive jet fuel. So a lot of the research going on around the world is how to take these processes that we know that work and upscale them up so that they can have actual commercialization potential that could compete against extractive fossil fuel industries. Not there yet, but the science is coming along. We've been doing some of that work at Mines as well. This is a study from Calgon et al. They have a clever process where they use an electrocatalysis process. They pull seawater into their electrocatalytic chamber here. They bring in seawater that has dissolved CO2. They rely on the ocean to pull CO2 out, which the ocean will pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The CO2 dissolves in the ocean. They pull it into their reaction chamber, then they spit out depleted seawater, and then they have solids. They're precipitating a carbonate mineral, calcium carbonate usually, and they're spitting that out and dumping it back into the ocean, I guess. So it's somebody else's process, and it can work, but upcycling these things can be quite difficult. There are some natural pathways in the carbon cycle that are continuously pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it back in. So one of the ways we talked about just barely was the ocean. The ocean is massive. It pulls a lot of CO2 out. The problem with the ocean is these processes are quite slow, and the CO2 goes back out from the ocean as well. But the CO2 gas is dissolved, mixes with water, becomes carbonic acid, and that can become bicarbonate, which synthesizes into carbonates, the CO3 2 minus there combined to a cation to form like calcite, calcium carbonate. The land is also massive, and the land is always trying to pull carbon out of the atmosphere if it has enough biological life inside the soil. So the land is massive, but it's also pretty slow in terms of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So we can leverage the ocean and the land, but we're going to need to do some things to speed up these processes, or we're not going to make anything, have anything come out of the atmosphere at the timescales that we really need. I want to take a moment to comment on agriculture. This is not related to what we've been doing at SURF, but there's another carbon project where we've been trying to help understand soil carbon sequestration using various agricultural practices. One of the things that we know is that conventional industrial agriculture with tillage and some of fertilizers and things has been one of the primary sources of atmospheric carbon. The soil organic content of the prairie before we started tilling it was in the 10 to 12%. Many areas across the Midwest, the soil organic carbon's down to 2 to 3%. Where'd that carbon go? Went in the atmosphere. It oxidized, or other processes pulled it up into the atmosphere. There's a current movement called regenerative agriculture, which is to use holistic management practices and some different management practices that feed the microbes in the soil. The microbes in the soil then are able to stimulate carbon sequestration through stimulating plants that put sugar exudates into the soil, and we can pull a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere using regenerative agriculture. Some science number here: carbon sequestration per hectare using a number of different, I think this is 9 different regenerative agriculture practices, either in grasslands or in more of a forestry or vineyard setting. And the amount of carbon that you can pull out of the atmosphere and put into the ground, if you are farming correctly and managing the landscape properly, putting fire back on the landscape, putting animals back on the landscape. We live in a fire adapted ecosystem in North America. We're fire adapted and we're animal adapted, and we don't have fire and animal on the landscape, and so no wonder the carbon's getting back out. So there's been many studies that show we can get the carbon back in the ground. However, it's going to take a long time and a lot of cooperation by a lot of producers and a lot of land managers to do this at scale. But this stuff's happening. We have been experimenting. We've done some studies on using compost as an amendment to kickstart soil carbon. The soils here, this is the same site. This is the darker the soil, the more organic content there is. This material at 45 inches down has almost 0 carbon in it. And it's this kind of light tan color, same material with lots of organic materials, very black. So Jerry Wright's, his dissertation was to mix compost from the landfill and see if we could kickstart some of these processes. And we found some interesting things. We found, based on what you did in active farming, different fields, some regeneratively managed vegetable gardens, and some untreated hill slopes, is that you could put a lot of carbon into the ground by mixing compost in. But if you don't manage it properly, the carbon oxidizes, the organic matter oxidizes, and after 15 years, it's all gone. Unless you have management practices that stimulate the microbes, and you grow the microbes first. You grow the microbes participate in the process of keeping that carbon in and then bringing additional carbon back in. So this was this 13.5. This was a regeneratively managed vegetable garden. After treatment, had 13.5% organic matter, and you can see that it climbed over time because of the management practice. So some work there. I get questions: can't we just plant a bunch of trees to solve the climate crisis? The answer is no. There are some significant problems with the tree solution. The first is, to get enough carbon out of the atmosphere and into a tree, you need large diameter trees that take a long time to grow. And usually when people are planting a lot of trees, they're planting a lot of trees that are small trees and tend to be fire danger. They tend to be single species monocrops, and they tend to just be more of an ecological disaster than help. And we have enough carbon monitoring science now, especially out of California, for the last 15 years on some of these plantations. We found that the tree planting solution is not a solution. It can be part of our portfolio. Planting trees is probably a good thing. However, the deforestation of North America may be slightly over-exaggerated. We actually have more trees in North America now than we did pre-Columbian. It's just we've changed the distributions. We've taken away a lot of our grasslands and made them into forested areas, and we've cut down trees in forested areas, and no. So trees are great, but we love them, but they're not going to be a solution. Geology. Can geology remove carbon? Yes, geologic processes are very effective at removing carbon, but they take millions of years. And that's the problem with relying on just geochemical pathways. So this is a pathway where we can take a mineral that is called crystal tile, otherwise known as asbestos. asbestos with some hydrogen, a little sulfate. We can split out the magnesium. The magnesium combines with a little water. If we have the right kickstart, we can get some atmospheric carbon, magnesium plus the atmospheric carbon, and we can create a mineral called hydromagnesite that locks away 4 carbon molecules out of the original asbestos. That's a geochemical process. The problem is it takes temperature and pressure, pH, and specific conditions to optimize that process. So what some people have said is we can take alkaline minerals, something like waste rock from mines or scoria or maybe basalt. You can grind it up, you can spread it on a farmer's field, and the geochemical process will pull carbon out of the atmosphere. We'll get a carbonate reaction, and you'll get new minerals developing in that field over time, and you've got net carbon pulled out of the atmosphere. And we could do that over massive amounts of the world, but it's slow. It's very slow. So we're trying to find ways to accelerate that. Generally, what we need for natural geochemical processes, we need time, we need large surface areas on the minerals. In other words, we might have to grind it. We need elevated temperatures, elevated pressure, and or extreme pH for these reactions to occur effectively. So nature is a partial solution, geology is a partial solution, so why don't we just put the 2 together? That's what we're going to do. We're going to put the 2 together. What about just injecting CO2 into deep rock formations? Sounds like a great idea. The problem is, let's say we have this old oil well and we're going to reverse it. And instead of pulling oil out, we're going to push captured CO2 down into the ground. Well, we can do that, but we need a cap rock formation that is low permeability so the carbon just doesn't come right back up. And so that's been the fundamental problem to deep injection problems around the world, is you have to have these cap rock formations that keep the CO2 down for 100 years. The problem with liquid CO2, it's slippery stuff, and it has a habit of popping up on the sides. So there are large-scale efforts underway around the world to inject the CO2 into different formations. If it's an ultramafic rock formation, we can get a geochemical carbonation. If it's sedimentary rock, we would just stick it down there and hope that it never comes back up. So there's been a lot of efforts, and there's some pipelines that have been built. There was a pipeline that was proposed to take compressed CO2 captured from ethanol plants and to pipe it to friendly geologic formations, where we could use the favorable conditions of the subsurface to inject the CO2. And the Summit Carbon pipeline was an application. I'm going to show 3 slides based on the application that Summit produced. As a pipeline engineer, I like pipelines. I know a lot of people don't like pipelines and have very strong feelings, but as a pipeline guy, I like pipelines. However, there's some problems with carbon pipelines. And the problems with carbon pipelines generally are that we have to get it to a very specific location, and then that carbon, being slippery stuff, the verification of keeping the carbon in that formation long-term is tenuous at best. So Summit Carbon Solutions had this idea where they were going to take pipelines from different ethanol plants across the Midwest, and they were going to take it to North Dakota to an old depleted oil field where they could inject it beneath the shale, and hopefully the carbon would stay. The permitting process, Summit Carbon Solutions submitted I thought it was, and as an engineer, I thought it was a wonderful application. The application was denied. As a matter of record, you can look all that up, and there were some very good environmental concerns why it was denied. So as an environmental engineer, I also appreciate the denial. Here's the thing about civil engineering. You're going to pay us either way. You're going to pay us to build it, or you're going to pay us to not build it. But we're going to get paid either way. But they had a great application that was ultimately denied on their idea to make a pipeline. So our approach with what we are doing is we're saying, can we leverage biology and geology so you don't need pipelines? That's the fundamental crux of what we're trying to do. So we're trying to say, if your capture source at the surface, it's maybe an industrial site, maybe it's a direct air capture site. If we can use microbes, we could inject anywhere. And so what our plan is to use microbially induced carbonate mineral precipitation. If we have sedimentary rock, we would be able to, using our process, to put it into the porous formation, flood it with CO2, put the microbes and some nutrients in for the microbes, and we would get, if we do things right, we would get the carbonation and we would create carbon minerals. So we no longer have slippery liquid CO2 trying to come back up to the surface, but we have the CO2 locked in place. And if we have favorable ultramafic rock formations, we could have very quick, rapid carbonation like they're seeing at CarbFix. The carbonation at CarbFix is taking about 5 to 10 years in Iceland. Our process, we can get it in about 2 weeks. We're very pleased with it. So let's talk about microbes and how microbes biomineralize. What microbes do? Microbes don't do anything special. What they do is they produce acids and enzymes. We could also not use the microbes and inject the acids and the enzymes, but microbes are more environmentally friendly, and we can keep feeding them, and they can produce more and more and more. Once you put the microbes in the ground at the right spot, you just got to keep feeding them. You give them the right food, they'll continue to produce what we need for a long time. And because they're microbes, they've got a kill switch. The kill switch, you cut off the food, they're dead. So microbes, what they do is they provide acids and enzymes to accelerate the carbonation reaction. So this is a graphic, we've seen this kind of before, where we have CO2, you put it in water, which develops carbonic acid, which develops into bicarbonate, which develops into carbonate, which binds to calcium or magnesium or iron or sodium or nickel or any metal, depending, and valence doesn't really matter, and we can create a carbonate mineral and lock up 1 carbon per 1 metal ion. So the enzymes and the acids accelerate this process. For those of you who like equations, here's the equations. I don't like equations. I'm more of a picture guy rather than an equation guy. But here's the process where we can take, if the mineralogy is right, we can take, for example, this magnesium silica oxide, and we can strip out the magnesium or calcium out of it, add it with CO2 and water, so we can get calcium carbonate. But we need an enzyme in order to make the carbonation reaction, and we need an acid in order to strip the magnesium or the calcium out of the rock. And that's what we're going to do with the microbes. So there are different microbes that do it in different ways. There are different enzymes. One of the enzymes is the urease enzyme. So this is a bacteria, a little cartoon of a bacteria. The bacteria produces the urease enzyme. The urease enzyme acts with urea, which is essentially just nitrogen. It needs a little nickel for an electron transporter, and it produces a carbonate mineral. So it's called urease, or the urolitical pathway. The microbes also produce some acids, which weather the rock to release some of these metals that are needed for the metabolism and as an electron donor as well. Biomineralization can happen anytime. This biomineralization happened over the last 3 weeks, or maybe the last month, in Death Valley in southern Nevada. So this is our colleague Dan Soder from Carbon Blade. He's out in southern Nevada right now. The filling of lower, yes, that lake, which is, it's always dry. They've had abnormal rainfall. The lake is filled up. It's stimulated the microbes that have been buried in the desert soils for hundreds of years, just waiting for water. They're just dormant. They've got water. They've got plenty of calcium, magnesium, and sodium because it's the desert. And within a few weeks, they have bioprecipitated that crust of calcium carbonate. Happens all the time. Unfortunately, to sequester large amounts of carbon, we're going to need to be able to use the carbon directly that we're pulling out of the atmosphere, because we have to accelerate it, and we have to do it at scales that allow for meaningful volumes. This requires us tinkering with the temperature, pressure, pH, salinity, and other environmental conditions that the bacteria have to live in. This is some scanning electron microscope imagery. This was work done at South Dakota Mines by Professor Songshul and Suki Bang, who retired in 2015. My lab took over their research and has continued to do this stuff. It's just, these are some excellent images, and I like to give credit to Professor Bang and Professor Bang. So this is near surface material, where these are sand grains, and these are calcium carbonate minerals that have been they've precipitated using urease at ground surface, room temperature, room pressure, low salinity. Things are kind of happy. But if we're going to do large volumes of this, we're going to need to tinker with pressure and pH and temperature and put the bugs, those microbes, in conditions where microbes don't want to live. Enter the extremophile. And we don't just need them to tolerate one extreme condition, i.e. temperature or pressure or pH or high salinity. We need them to tolerate all those conditions. So we need microbes that can survive in a host of extreme conditions. The many extreme conditions. So we need microbes that can tolerate all of these things. So we can sample microbes from all sorts of places. There's been a lot of work over the decades in isolating microbes from various extreme environments. We've worked with some. We have some bacteria that was isolated from deep sea thermal vents that we work with in our lab. It's an amazing bacterial strain. It's microaerophilic, meaning it needs just a little bit of oxygen. Not enough oxygen, it dies. Too much oxygen, it dies. It just needs just that little bit, and it's an amazing bacteria. So what we've done is we've tried to tailor the microbes to the rock. See, the issue is that the chemistry of the rock can also be toxic to the bacteria. So not all bacteria can survive on all minerals. However, if we marry them nicely and we get them a mineral composition that is compatible with the microbes, and the microbes that are compatible with those minerals, the microbes can harvest the metals they need out of the rock itself for us, and then we don't have to feed them as much, give them as much resources to do their work. And that is the opportunity that presents itself when we have the challenge of mineral ecology. So what we've done is we've done some sampling expeditions, one of which was the great extremophile hunt at the 4,100 foot level at SURF. This was July 2021. This was Dr. Tanvi Goval. This is our master's student, Megan Vaughn, who graduated, and that's Dan Soder, who's now with Carbon Blade. And we sampled from water and rock at the 4,100 level. And we were able to, what we had to do is we had to acquire and develop a DNA quality rock milling machine so that we could mill the cores down to a fine powder without compromising the DNA, extract the DNA from the microbes so that we could work with it. It was a lot of fun, a great challenge to be able to sample. The problem with the Sanford Underground Lab is the rock is really dense and hard. So there's microbes in the rock, but they're not living in the rock mass. They're living on the cracks. So the microbes are extremely efficient at finding small surfaces to live on. So they're living on the minute cracks in the rock core, as well as on some of the larger pore surfaces. So it was a very interesting challenge to sample those microbes. We've done a lot of testing in the lab, identifying different microbes. This is not a complete list. This is just some of the genus of the microbes that have been identified, and studying what it takes to grow them, their growth rates. If we feed them A, B, or C, what is their growth response? If we feed them X, Y, or Z, what is the growth response? Because they need some food in order to do their work. But we have been able to do some of that isolation. With the microbes, what we've done is we've gone into the lab, and Professor Gosha Yusisinik, who's our petrologist, who's a person who studies mineral formation, has devised a very special experiment where we could take different minerals with different bacteria at different temperatures and pressure and produce, and this is scanning electron microscope imagery, where we get carbonate minerals developing in under 2 weeks on whatever rock we've put in, and we've tested, which we're growing them in 2 weeks. The fastest natural is about 5 years. So we're greatly accelerating things. When we pair with the Carbon Blade units, which is our industry partner, they can pull out, about 1 metric ton per day of 2 atmosphere compressed CO2. They can pull out more CO2 than we can use. So we have a lot of work to upscale our process in order to be able to take all that CO2 and use it and turn it into enough carbonate minerals. The work was funded by National Science Foundation again. We've done a lot of work with on the biology side. Professor Rajesh Sani and his team in our research group, we have not worked with urease. We're working with an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. We like carbonic anhydrase because it requires an additional carbon molecule carbon dioxide it likes best in order to do its chemical reaction and to catalyze. So we can chew up 2 carbon molecules rather than just 1 using carbonic anhydrase. So we've done modeling of the carbonic anhydrase that we have from some of our proprietary microbes that we've isolated. We've done the docking studies as well, and we've been able to document the carbonic anhydrase production rates under various temperatures, pressures, salinities, pH, and also their reaction with various rock minerals. So at South Dakota Mines, Professor Rajesh Sawhney and his lab, they have a suite of complementary bacteria, just a small little selection of ones that are in the library that we've been experimenting with, and it works. It works great. We've been able to produce carbonate minerals. This all looks very sciencey. There's so much to digest in this. The experiments, this is called, this is the externally heated cold seal bomb pressure vessel in which our experiments are done, is this device here, where we can get up to several kilobars of pressure. We can vary the temperature from about 30 Celsius up to, I guess the lowest is 20 Celsius room temperature. We can get up to about 80 Celsius as well. We can go to 150 Celsius in the chamber, but we'll kill even the most hardy microbes will not survive that high. So there are some hyperthermophilic bacteria that will survive above 100 Celsius. Unfortunately, those are, at least to my knowledge, dangerous because they don't die in heat. So we don't use them in this lab because this is not a biosafety level 3 lab, and we don't want to die. So we're stuck with microbes that can live about 80 Celsius, and which is pretty hot. It's pretty hot. The pH range, we're able to work with pH as low as about a pH of 4.7, which is fairly extreme. The nice thing is the pH rises during the carbonation process. So what happens is you put the microbes in, they produce the organic acids, so the pH drops, and the acid brings the calcium and the nickel and the different metals out of the rock, and then the carbonation process starts, which raises the pH. So we start at a pH of 7, it goes down to about 4.5 to 5, and then it comes up to about 7, 8, or maybe 9 in the carbonation process. So we have a net alkalinization at the end of the process. We use scanning electron microscopes and X-ray diffraction and elemental mapping in order to document and verify what we're doing, because everything has to be verified. And we've tested Kilauea basalts, we've tested diopside, we've tested many different minerals and bacterial combinations. Yeah, we've got some of the bacteria to survive 500 bars of pressure and 80 Celsius. Which is impressive. They don't produce a lot of carbonic anhydrase at that temperature and pressure, but they're still alive, which we thought was a major success, that we can keep them alive to some pretty extreme conditions. We've done some genetic engineering of polyextremophiles. So the reason for the genetic engineering is it's easier to take a carbonic anhydrase gene and put it into a bacteria that can survive the temperature, pressure, pH, salinity, and mineral ecology, than it is to take an adaptive gene and put it into a microbe that produces carbonic anhydrase. So what we do is we take microbes that can survive the conditions and we clone in the carbonic anhydrase genes into those microbes. So if they're not producing what we need, we can bring in more genes to produce more of the enzymes. We can also have them produce urease enzymes and some other enzymes, but we've found good success with carbonic anhydrase. So we have done some minor genetic engineering. We don't want to do too much for obvious reasons. So we have approximately 1,000 mutants that have been tested. Phase 2, we're trying to upscale this process, and we're trying to, what our next step is to leverage mine tailings. So up in Lead, there's a massive mine tailings pile that has very favorable mineralogy that it could be mined back out of the tailings pile, we think, and some other materials. We can take also, we think we can mine some of the Missouri River silts that are filling up the Missouri River reservoirs, like Oahe Dam and Fort all those dams along the Missouri that are silting in. There's some good stuff in there that we can use for this as well. We're also trying to work with some Hawaiian basaltic silts that are dredge spoils out of the harbor. to try to take these processes and instead of injecting the CO2 in the ground and trying to inject the microbes in the ground, developing a reactor vessel that can at the ground surface where we're using renewable energy because the energy demands are pretty low to do a multi-stage bioweathering, biomineralization, and then metals extraction process. So we're working on a major proposal to the Department of Energy to do this kind of stuff. We have some challenges. We have to be able to separate out the hard bits that we've mineralized. We've got some rocks that we're building. We're essentially building rocks. We need to get them out of solution. And we have to use, we're thinking of using supercritical CO2 to strip heavy metals back out of those microbes because we have a heavy metals problem when we're doing anything at the ground surface. We don't want any nickel or zinc or, God forbid, uranium or something getting loose. And so we need to be able to strip that back out. So we've got some processes there. One of the things that we have found when we have tried some of the minor field trials is pesticide use. Over pesticide use is a significant problem for what we're trying to do in terms of upscaling. These big pulses and releases of pesticides from, we don't know where they come from, but all of a sudden everything's dead because of a pesticide. So that's maybe one of our societal challenges that we as a society need to figure out if we're really going to make a good run at carbon capture and sequestration is we've got to get our pesticide use under control because it keeps killing things. Things that work in the lab really well, we take them out in the field and everything dies. And then we analyze why everything died. It's pesticides, residuals. We had some next steps in the research that we're trying to do at Mines. We're trying to work more on regenerative agriculture and working with folks in the regenerative agriculture space. We have isolated the microbes that live on the lining of the termite mounds. The microbes that live on the tunnels in here are methane. They love methane. That's why they live there. So we can use these. We're trying to use the methane oxidizing bacteria that live on the termite mounds. We've isolated the DNA. We know what species they are. We have cultures from ATCC of the same genus and species that we're starting to work with in the lab for methane capture using microbes themselves. Some other next steps, regenerating America's grasslands. Even if we take away the spots that are being actively farmed, we have an enormous, the North America, there's nowhere better on the planet for large grasslands than North America. Africa gets all the, the savannas of Africa get all the glory, but there's nowhere better than North America. So helping restore some of our grasslands is some of this important work. And making blocks. This is a carbon block, Carbon Blade as our partner working with us. And this is an enzymatic process. So this was made just with the enzymes, not with the microbes, but it's a brick. They pulled the CO2 out of the atmosphere. We have a little seed sand in there to give a surface for the enzymes to work and to provide a nucleation point. And there's a block. It's a block of carbon. Another problem that we're trying to work with are orphan natural gas wells. Natural gas wells, once they're no longer profitable, are locked off and abandoned. But the seals, the bentonite and concrete seals on those natural gas wells, they fail. Within 30 to 70 years, the failure rate's almost 100%. We call them orphaned wells. Nobody owns them anymore. They're just wells that have been capped and they're sitting out there in a field. We can identify them using hyperspectral cameras because they produce a plume of methane. So what you can do is you can take a hyperspectral camera, you can fly it on a helicopter, you can put it on a UAV, you can put it on a tripod, and you can image a giant field and you can identify what wellheads are leaking methane. And we really think that our process, we could open that back up, we could re-inject our process down there and reseal off that leaking orphan well. These orphan wells are a major environmental issue across the United States, and it's just getting worse as a lot of our well fields get older. And Professor Rajesh Sawhney and his team they're taking an aggressive look at taking that CO2 and upcycling it into biopolymers and bioplastics. Bioplastics made from captured CO2 is one of the things that they're working on in their group. So the future of carbon capture, reuse, and sequestration, it's bright. There's a lot of exciting research being done. What I love as a public servant who works at a state institution And our mission is to provide workforce development and economic development for the state of Utah. School of Mines is here to help the economy. There's a lot of exciting economic opportunities for South Dakota with these technologies. We have a lot of the things we need. We've got space, we've got land, we've got sun, we've got wind, we've got a lot of the things that we need to leverage these technologies. And we think propelled by biology, wise land use and management, and the power of polyextremophile microbes, we can really bring together a suite of different industries and technologies that can really take a dent out of the climate crisis. So, thank you. So, are there a few questions or first of all? No, so those are not exothermic reactions. So the temperature facilitates. So the reaction rates are better at certain temperatures and pressures than others. Yeah. Yeah. So we can do it. We could do this at the ground surface. We could put a pile out here and it'll happen, but it'll just take hundreds of years. What we're trying to do is if we look at injecting it into, it's hot down here. It's really hot. And so what we're trying to do is tailor the process for the known conditions in those old depleted oil and gas plays, or in old mine conditions, or in different rock formations. Because if we stick the bugs that work, the microbes that work well at the ground surface, they don't work very well because they just can't survive. And we might as well just be extracting urease enzymes out of jack beans and just pumping jack beans slurries down into the ground. Yeah, 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 yes. Ladies first.
In other universities or other countries in this.
Every university around the world has somebody who is chasing climate carbon money. The apolitical answer is everybody's chasing this because so professors, we follow the money. And society has said we want solutions for this, so there's money. So some nations are ahead of us, other nations are behind us. Australia is doing a good job. Iceland is doing a really good job. Yeah, there's people all over the world working on all this stuff. And it comes down to what people want solutions for. And as people are looking for more and more solutions, another thing that we've taken advantage of is the carbon markets. And as carbon markets have gained steam and there's more money being put into the carbon markets, private industry is more and more interested. So Google is now sponsoring an annual carbon capture and sequestration prize that is a lot of money. A lot of large companies are. There's the X Prize, which was for carbon sequestration, was like $20 million. So there's private, there's universities, there's startup companies. Like I talked about this one out of the UK, there's companies that are chasing money like crazy because of this. One of the things I will say where the United States is maybe one of the leaders is in ag. And ironically, it's South and North Dakota. Some of the leaders in regenerative agriculture and in building are South Dakota and North Dakota producers, or some of those who are out in front, which I kind of like. There's some, yeah. Anyway, yes.
I find that totally absurd about the fact that South Dakota farmers spend my experience and all my years that agricultural advancement or agricultural activity is slow to evolve, and with the political will also being part of it, and the economic need, I think the rest back is nothing is that.
Yeah.
So if you look at agricultural sector, are there small?
It's small pockets. No. So when producers are doing this, they're doing it because they care. The USDA does not have policies right now that I'm aware of that are actively incentivizing it. Many USDA policies that I'm aware of, I'm not a producer, I'm a professor, so I don't probably discourage, which is, yes, we're probably more discouraged. So when people are doing that, they're doing it because they care. The thing that they find though, is their yields go down, but their profits go up. So that's why it's spreading, is because people are like, wait a second, if I follow these, I get brownie bucks for helping the climate. My yields go down a little bit, but because you're not putting as much fertilizer and pesticide, their profits going up. Yeah.
There was a period of time back in the 1970s, 1960s, 70s, especially with wheat production, when prices were high. We went vegetable, tore up an incredible amount of grass in western South Dakota to plant wheat.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing a movement to turn that back. There have been government programs like CRP, and well, we got rid of the.
I'm not aggy enough. I'm not aggy enough to answer that question. My interest is, if I go out here and I sample the soil, what's going on here versus here, and what can I, take it back into the lab? That's my. But I know somebody who is. Dave Clay at South Dakota State. That is his, and he's maybe the world's greatest living expert. He's at South Dakota State, and that is his thing. I should ask him. Yeah. Well, we tried. We the federal funding cycles are mercurial and capricious, let's just say. We've tried. Yeah.
So, one slides, one of them, that's proprietary research.
We don't think I'm doing this for out of the goodness of my heart, do you? I want to sell it. Of the research team. So all of an invention at Mines is owned by the South Dakota Board of Regents. National Science Foundation gets a piece because they're the funding agency. Board of Regents gets a piece. The university gets a piece. The department gets a piece, and the inventors get a small piece on the back end if we're able to commercialize.
So that's my question. How far are you from perhaps commercializing?
I would say $5 million in 3 years. So we're putting a proposal into Department of Energy in a month from yesterday, asking for $5 million and 3 years in order to close the loop. At least that's my estimate. We think it's scalable. The carbon capture certainly is scalable. The microbes are certainly scalable. The problem is the geology, because rock is heavy and drilling is expensive. So the scalability problems have little to do with the biology or the carbonation or the process. The limitations are largely geologic in nature, and or limits that, because of the well injection permit policies of Department of Energy and various states. Because this requires right now a class 5 well permit, at which there's like 3 in the country. So there's some regulatory burdens as well. Okay. Okay.
Some activity and all the stuff that's going on in South Dakota. I don't know if it happened or not, but there was a movement by the South Dakota legislature to refer a language to be voted on by a people in November. I don't know if maybe past I'd have to do some research, but as you haven't dealt with that, and I know it's very.
I haven't dealt with the pipe. As a practicing engineer, I build natural gas pipelines, not carbon pipelines.
We have several, but
yes. First 10 years of my career, we're taking natural gas from Wyoming and putting it to Utah.
Well, anyone just to ask the question, just you know, to ask the question, from a standpoint, people are not educated on this exercise. How do we make it efficient step, or how do we talk about how we talk about it, but there's climate deniers and there's other students that have tried it. And how do you get into that subject from your perspective?
Slowly, consistently. Slowly, consistently, the science comes slowly and consistently. And in the end, economics drives everything. And economics is not just about money, economics is about value. Money has a value, lifestyle has a value, nature has a value, everything has a value. Society assigns the value to everything. The fundamentals of economics is things that have value, we as a society will work towards and adopt. And as climate value changes relative to the value of other things, societal values change. And as societal values change, the economics always changes. So if we want this to really work, we have to make the value of the climate as important as other economic values. That's a value proposition.
So our like say,
Well, what's the problem with it? If it leaks, you're just putting some carbon back. It's not like an oil pipeline.
well, there are people that are pretty afraid.
Well, it's disruptive. The problem with pipelines is they're massively disruptive.
Well, there's statements that people have made about the potential for carbon pipelines exploding. And
Well, yeah, they're pressurized vessels. There's risk associated with pressurized vessels. We live in a risk, so part of the risk calculus. So in terms of economics, always part of economics is risk. So are we willing to accept a risk, mitigate a risk, transfer the risk, or avoid the risk? And so the decision from the regulators for this system has been the risk has been too much for the incentive. But yeah, there's risk with everything. But it's not like an oil pipeline is going to leak oil everywhere. But there would be a boom. It'd be loud. Things would go flying. I wouldn't want to be standing there if it were to. But you know, pipelines are not without their risks, which is why we're trying to develop technologies where we don't have to have a pipeline and we can just put it in the ground right where you stand. Yeah. So what triggered this research was we were working with these microbes that were doing wonderful things to stabilize soil. So I'm a soils engineer. So we're trying to take loose soil and make it hard and stable. And we can do it. Great, we can do it. And I was like, but can I do something more meaningful and more potentially marketable? And that's where having great people like this, I had this image of all the people. I was working with all the people in this slide independently on different things. We were working on this, that, and this, and that. And I was sitting in the Minneapolis airport looking at a grant solicitation from National Science Foundation. What are we going to apply? How are we going to put in for this money? And there's the idea. And it was working with her on rocks and her on biology and him on microbes and him on carbon and him on geology at the same time on different projects. And all of a sudden, I can remember the moment where I was sitting in the Minneapolis airport where I had the idea for this. So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for your coming today and hope you enjoyed it. And
As Dr. Lingwall said, thank you for coming. As I said earlier, we do this every third Tuesday. So April 16th will be our next presentation. And we had a small change in presenters. Originally, we were going to have a guest speaker from the University of Wyoming. Unfortunately, he can't make it. So instead, we are going to have Dr. Christy Tidwell from our humanities, arts, and social sciences department, kind of sort of talk about a related topic. She is going to talk about how humanities anxieties about nature, so too much carbon in the atmosphere, right? How that is portrayed in various movies. So, for instance, Jaws. Scary, right? Sharks. The animated movie WALL-E is about climate change and environmental disaster. So she's going to kind of touch on different movies throughout pop culture history and how they reflect humanity's anxieties about nature. So it should be pretty interesting. Hope to see you on April 16th.